Shadows danced across ancient redwoods as Iolana Mackenzie traced her fingertips along the ceremonial markings carved into her forearm. The intricate patterns, a binding contract made flesh, were still raw and tender, much like the emotions churning inside her. 3 days had passed since the binding ceremony, yet the weight of what she'd committed to pressed heavier with each setting sun. From her perch on the cliffside overlooking the hidden valley that housed the Otsana clan's territory, Iolana could see smoke rising from the communal lodge. Tonight would be her first formal appearance as Tasunka's intended mate, his alpha-elect, and the thought made her stomach clench. Having second thoughts? The deep voice startled her, though she recognized it immediately. Nodin, the clan's ancient keeper of lore, emerged from between 2 towering trees. His weathered face bore the marks of 9 decades, yet his eyes retained a sharp clarity that pierced through pretense. The silver wolf pendant hanging from his neck, symbol of his station, caught the dying sunlight. "Not second thoughts," Iolana replied carefully. "Just processing." Nodin's laugh was dry as autumn leaves, a diplomatic answer. "Your mother taught you well." The mention of her mother sent a familiar pang through Iolana's chest. Selena Mackenzie had been gone 3 years now, taking her warmth, wisdom, and secrets to the grave. "The council grows impatient," Nodin continued. "Tasunka awaits. And what the Alpha wants, the Alpha gets," Iolana murmured, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Nodin's expression hardened. "Mind your words, child. The contract between you and Tasunka goes beyond your personal feelings. It's about survival. The blood pact with the Northern Territories expires in 6 moons. Without a united front..." "I know the politics, Nodin." Iolana stood, brushing pine needles from her jeans. "I've heard the warnings since I could walk. The shadow line must not be crossed. The balance must be maintained." She shook her head. "But arranging marriages like we're living in the Dark Ages, there has to be another way. The old ways have preserved our kind for millennia. Humans hunt what they fear, and they would fear us if they knew what lurks beneath our skin." His eyes briefly flashed amber, a reminder of the beast within. "The union between the Alpha's bloodline and yours seals the fractures forming in our society." Iolana sighed, knowing further argument was futile. She'd signed the contract willingly. After all, if trading free will for the security of her clan could be called willing. "I'll be down shortly," she promised. Nodin nodded once, then disappeared back into the forest with the silent grace of one who had walked these woods for nearly a century. Once alone, Iolana closed her eyes and allowed her other senses to expand. The gift of her bloodline, enhanced perception, flooded her consciousness. She could hear the heartbeats of creatures a mile away, smell the distinct musk of the shifters gathering below, feel the vibrations of their movements through the earth. What she couldn't sense was any genuine affection from Tasunka toward her. Their interactions had been formal, distant, political. He treated their binding as a transaction, which perhaps it was. But something in his carefully guarded emotions suggested deeper currents. "You're stalling." The voice, female, amused, familiar, came from behind her. Iolana didn't bother turning around. "Hello, Maya." Maya Black River stepped into view, her copper skin glowing in the sunset. As Iolana's childhood friend and now personal attendant, she was one of the few people who could speak candidly without fear of reprisal. "If you're about to tell me my duty," Iolana began. "Actually," Maya interrupted, "I brought you this." She extended a small leather pouch tied with sinew. "It was your mother's. She asked me to give it to you before your binding." Iolana accepted the pouch with trembling fingers. "Why didn't you give it to me before the ceremony?" Maya's expression grew guarded. "I tried. Nodin intercepted me. Said it wasn't appropriate." I had to wait until his attention was elsewhere. Frowning, Iolana loosened the drawstring and emptied the contents into her palm. A simple silver ring set with a small moonstone fell out, along with a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. "I've never seen this before," Iolana murmured, turning the ring in her fingers. The inside band bore an inscription in ancient Otsanan, "Truth before blood." "There's more," Maya whispered, her voice suddenly tense. "Your mother told me. She said when the time came, you should know that the contract isn't what it seems, that Tasunka isn't—" She stopped abruptly, head tilting. "Someone's coming." Iolana quickly slipped the ring onto her finger and tucked the note into her boot. Just in time. A moment later, 2 of Tasunka's personal guards emerged from the trail. "Alpha-elect," the taller one addressed her with minimal deference. "Your presence is required below." "Of course," Iolana replied smoothly, slipping into the role she'd been groomed for since birth. She shot Maya a quick glance that communicated they would finish their conversation later. The Great Lodge pulsed with energy as firelight danced across the faces of gathered clan members. Drums beat a primal rhythm that called to the beast within each shifter present. At the head of the circular chamber, Tasunka sat upon the carved throne that had belonged to his family for generations. At 34, he was in his prime, imposing even in human form. His jet-black hair was pulled back, revealing sharp features and penetrating eyes that could shift from dark brown to golden amber when his emotions ran high. Unlike many shifters who favored casual modern clothing, Tasunka wore a combination of traditional and contemporary, dark jeans paired with a leather vest adorned with clan symbols over bare skin, revealing the intricate tattoos that mapped his lineage and accomplishments. When Iolana entered, the drumming paused. All eyes turned to her, some curious, some approving, some openly hostile. The political factions within the clan were no secret. Not everyone supported this union. Iolana kept her chin high as she walked the length of the lodge. She'd chosen to wear a modern interpretation of traditional attire, a deep green dress that hugged her curves before flowing to her ankles, embellished with silver thread that echoed the ancestral patterns of her bloodline. Her long, dark hair was braided with leather cords and silver beads, marking her status. As she approached, Tasunka's expression remained impassive, though his nostrils flared slightly, taking in her scent, assessing her mood. It was a wolf thing, this constant reading of chemical signals. Iolana had always found it vaguely intrusive. "You're late," he said quietly as she took her place beside him. "My apologies, Alpha," she replied with practiced deference, though the ring on her finger felt suddenly heavy, a silent rebellion against whatever game was being played. Tasunka's gaze dropped to her hand, his eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar jewelry. Before he could comment, Nodin stepped forward to address the gathering. "Tonight we celebrate the sacred binding between Alpha Tasunka Ravenwolf and Iolana Mackenzie, daughter of the Eastern Line. Their union fulfills the prophecy spoken by the first seer. When shadow and sight become one, the fractured shall heal, and the lost shall return." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The prophecy was well known, though interpretations varied widely among the clan's scholars. Nodin continued. 7 days hence, at the full moon, the mating ceremony will complete what we have begun. The Northern Territories will send their delegation to witness the fulfillment of our pact, ensuring peace for another generation. As Nodin spoke, Iolana became aware of Tasunka studying her, not with the possessive interest of a mate-to-be, but with careful calculation. When their eyes met, something flashed in his, a momentary crack in his stoic facade that revealed— was it guilt? The celebration proceeded with ritual intensity. Food was shared, stories were told, and eventually, the ceremonial dance began. Iolana and Tasunka moved through the steps with practiced precision, their bodies close but their spirits distant. You seem distracted, Tasunka murmured as they circled each other. Do I? Iolana responded. Perhaps I'm wondering why my intended shows more interest in clan politics than in knowing me. A muscle in his jaw tightened. This union is about duty, not personal desires. Is that all I am to you? A duty? His hand gripped hers more, firmly as they turned. What you are to me is complicated. Then uncomplicate it, she challenged, emboldened by her mother's mysterious message. What aren't you telling me about this contract, Tasunka? His rhythm faltered momentarily, a tell that confirmed her suspicions. But before he could respond, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the lodge. A man staggered in, clothes torn and bloody. He was not Otsanen. His scent marked him as a shifter from the Northern Territories. Guards immediately surrounded him, but he called out before they could remove him. Treachery! The eastern boundary has been breached. His wild eyes found Tasunka. Your border guards are dead, Alpha. They bear the mark of the Shadow Claw. The lodge erupted in chaos. The Shadow Claw was a radical faction that had broken from the clans decades ago, advocating for an end to secrecy, believing shifters should reveal themselves to humans and claim their rightful place in the natural order. Tasunka released Iolana and strode toward the messenger. How many? He demanded. At least 20. They hit without warning. I only escaped because... The man coughed, blood speckling his lips, because they wanted me to deliver a message. Tasunka's expression darkened. What message? They said, the daughter of truth will not bind with lies. The contract is void. All eyes turned to Iolana, who stood frozen in place, her mother's ring suddenly burning against her skin. Tasunka's gaze locked with hers across the room, and in that moment, his careful mask slipped entirely. What she saw in his eyes wasn't anger or confusion. It was fear. Secure the perimeter, he ordered his guards. No one enters or leaves the territory without my authorization. He pointed to Nodin. Gather the council, now. As the lodge emptied of all but essential personnel, Tasunka approached Iolana with determined strides. Without speaking, he grabbed her wrist, turning her hand to examine the ring. Where did you get this? His voice was dangerously low. It was my mother's, Iolana replied, trying to pull her hand away. What does it have to do with anything? Instead of answering, Tasunka called out, Nodin, did you know about this? The old man approached, his face ashen as he saw the ring. Impossible. I destroyed it years ago when Selena... He stopped himself, exchanging a loaded glance with Tasunka. When my mother what? Iolana demanded, looking between them. What are you hiding from me? Tasunka released her wrist and stepped back, his expression closing off once more. Take her to the secure quarters, he instructed one of his guards. She doesn't leave until I've sorted this out. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me. What's happening? Iolana's voice rose with indignation. What does this attack have to do with me? With my mother's ring? Everything, Nodin whispered, almost to himself. It has everything to do with the truth your mother died to protect. Destiny had just shown its hand, and as Iolana was escorted from the lodge, the moonstone on her finger caught the firelight, illuminating an ancient symbol hidden within the stone, one that matched a birthmark on her shoulder blade, a mark she'd always been told to keep hidden at all costs. Imprisonment within the Alpha's private quarters was a gilded cage at best. Lavish furnishings and modern amenities did little to soften the reality that Iolana was now a prisoner in what should have been her future home. Guards stood outside, the heavy oak door, and the windows, though offering breathtaking views of the forest, were reinforced with silver alloy, meant to contain even the strongest shifter. Darkness had fully descended, the night punctuated by distant howls as patrols swept the territory. Iolana paced the perimeter of the room, her enhanced senses detecting snippets of urgent conversations throughout the compound, but nothing substantial enough to piece together what was happening. Finally, alone and unobserved, she retrieved the yellowed note from her boot. Her mother's elegant handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Iolana, if you're reading this, then the time has come for you to learn the truth I've kept hidden. The binding contract with Tasunka is not what it appears. Your bloodline carries more than just the gift of enhanced perception. You are the last descendant of the sighted ones, those who could bridge the gap between human and beast without transformation. The ring I've left you belonged to your grandmother and her mother before her. It is a key to memories stored in blood, both yours and others. Touch it to your marked shoulder while focused on a question, and the past may offer answers. Trust no one completely, not even those who seem allies. The prophecy has been corrupted for political gain. Your destiny is not to strengthen the old ways, but to forge a new path. Remember, truth before blood." With eternal love, Mother Iolana read the letter twice more, her mind racing. The sighted ones were considered mythical by most modern shifters, near humans who could communicate with and command shifters in their animal forms. According to legend, they had been wiped out centuries ago during the Great Purge, when humans had hunted both shifters and their human allies to near extinction. If what her mother claimed was true, it would explain many things. Why she had never experienced the transformation despite coming of age. Why Nodin had always watched her with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. Why her binding to Tasunka was considered so essential to clan stability. She touched the ring to her birthmark as instructed, focusing on her most pressing question. What is the real purpose of my binding to Tasunka? Heat spread across her shoulder, crawling down her spine like liquid fire. The room tilted sickeningly, and suddenly, she wasn't in Tasunka's quarters anymore. A much younger Nodin stood arguing with Iolana's mother in a secluded clearing. Selena Mackenzie looked exactly as Iolana remembered. Fierce, beautiful, unwavering in her convictions. "You can't possibly agree to this," Selena hissed. "Using my daughter to neutralize the sighted bloodline? Making her sterile through a corrupt binding ritual? It's barbaric." "It's necessary," Nodin replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "The council fears what might happen if a full-blooded, sighted one were born again. The prophecy clearly states." "The prophecy has been deliberately misinterpreted for generations," Selena cut in. "I've seen the original texts in the hidden archives. When shadow and sight become one, doesn't mean through binding or mating. It means reconciliation of purpose. The old translation was manipulated to justify subjugating my bloodline." Nodin looked uncomfortable. Tasunka's father decreed, "Orion Ravenwolf is a dictator hiding behind tradition," Selena spat. "And his son is no better. They fear any power that might challenge their control. Be careful, Selena. Such talk is dangerous. The truth is always dangerous to those who build their power on lies." She turned away, then paused. "I won't allow this binding. I'll take Iolana away before I let you use her like this." Nodin's expression darkened. "The contract has already been written. The stars have been consulted. It will happen, with or without your blessing." "We'll see about that," Selena whispered, her hand moving to a silver ring on her finger, the same ring Iolana now wore. The vision dissolved, leaving Iolana gasping on the floor of Tasunka's quarters. Cold rage washed through her as the implications became clear. Her mother's accidental death 3 years ago, a supposed hiking mishap, now seemed suspiciously convenient. The door to the room swung open without warning. Tasunka entered alone, his expression grim as he surveyed her position on the floor. "What have you done?" he asked quietly, nostrils flaring as he detected the magical residue of her vision quest. Iolana rose slowly, dropping all pretense of submission. I've learned what you and your father planned for me. The corrupted binding ritual, the sterilization, the suppression of my bloodline. If she expected shock or denial, Tasunka disappointed her. He merely sighed, rubbing a hand across his face in a gesture that suddenly made him look older, wearier. It's more complicated than what you've seen, he said finally. Explain it to me then, she challenged. Explain why I should trust. Anything you say when you've built our entire relationship on deception. Tasunka moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit forest. For several moments, he remained silent, as if weighing his options. The attack tonight was no coincidence, he began. The Shadow Claw has infiltrators within our clan. Someone told them about your mother's ring, about the truth of your heritage. And what is that truth exactly? Iolana pressed. He turned to face her. You're more than just a descendant of the Sighted Ones. According to the original prophecy, the one kept hidden from most of the clan, you're the rebirth of the first seer herself. Iolana blinked, temporarily speechless. The first seer was a quasi-religious figure in shifter lore, the original bridge between human and beast, who had taught the earliest shifters to control their transformations and established the clan, structure that had protected them for millennia. That's impossible, she finally managed. Is it? Tasunka challenged. You've never shifted, despite reaching maturity. You possess perceptive abilities far beyond normal shifters. And your birthmark, he gestured to her shoulder, is identical to the symbol of the first seer found in our oldest cave drawings. If that's true, Iolana said slowly, then why try to bind me in a ritual that would neutralize whatever power I might have? Why not help me understand it? Tasunka's jaw tightened. That was my father's plan, not mine. Orion feared what your emergence might mean. The prophecy speaks of great change, of old powers falling to make way for new growth. He interpreted that as a threat to his leadership. And you? What do you believe? His eyes met hers directly for perhaps the first time since they'd met. I believe my father's fear blinded him to the true meaning of the prophecy. The Shadow Claw's extremism is gaining support, because our people feel trapped between two worlds, unable to fully embrace either human society or our animal nature. We need a new way forward. Iolana studied him skeptically. Yet you agreed to the binding contract. You were willing to go through with the ritual that would have destroyed my heritage. A flash of guilt crossed his features. I was my father's son. I believed in the sanctity of tradition, in the wisdom of the elders. But things changed. What things? Tasunka hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a series of scars that Iolana recognized as evidence of blood magic, similar to the marks on her own arm from the binding ritual, but deeper, more extensive. 6 months ago, I began having visions, glimpses of a future where shifters lived neither in hiding nor in domination, but in balance. In these visions, you stood at the center of a great transformation. His voice lowered. I consulted the hidden archives in secret, searching for answers. What I found contradicted everything I'd been taught about the prophecy, about your bloodline, about the first seer. And about the binding ritual, Iolana added. He nodded grimly. The ritual my father intended to use at the mating ceremony wasn't the traditional one. It was corrupted with elements designed to neutralize the sighted bloodline. When I discovered this, I began working to undermine his plan without raising suspicion. Why not just tell me the truth? Iolana demanded. Because I didn't know who I could trust. The clan is divided, with spies in every faction. If word had reached my father that I was questioning the ritual, he would have removed you from the equation, Iolana finished, thinking of her mother's fate. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by distant howls from the forest. What happened to my mother? Iolana finally asked, the question she'd held inside for 3 years. Did your father have her killed when she threatened to expose the truth? Pain flickered across Tasunka's face. I don't know for certain. Suspected, but had no proof. By the time I began questioning my father's decisions, Selena was already gone. Iolana's anger flared. Yet you said nothing, did nothing. I was trying to protect you the only way I knew how, by appearing to comply while working to change things from within. If I had openly defied my father, both of us would have been in danger. Before Iolana could respond, the door burst open. Maya rushed in, breathless and wide-eyed. They've breached the inner perimeter, she gasped. The Shadow Claw. They're being led by Orion. Tasunka's expression hardened. My father is dead. He died 3 months ago. Maya shook her head frantically. No, it was staged. He's alive. And he's leading the attack. They're coming for Iolana. The implications struck like lightning. Orion had faked his death, joined the radical faction he'd supposedly despised, and was now attacking his own clan, all to prevent the prophecy from unfolding. How long do we have? Tasunka demanded. Minutes, maybe less. They've disabled the security systems and have shifters in beast form overrunning the guards. Tasunka moved with decisive speed, crossing to a hidden panel in the wall. He pressed his palm against it, revealing a concealed safe. From inside, he withdrew an ancient-looking leather case. You need to go with Maya, he told Iolana, handing her the case. There's a tunnel beneath this building that leads to the old ritual grounds. Nodin will meet you there. And you? Iolana asked, surprised by the sudden concern she felt. I'll hold them off. Buy you time. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. The case contains the original prophecy texts and a map to the first seer's sanctuary. If I don't make it, find the sanctuary. Complete the awakening ritual described. In the texts, distant explosions shook the building. The attack was escalating quickly. Come with us, Iolana urged, the animosity between them temporarily forgotten in the face of immediate danger. Tasunka shook his head. My father will expect that. Someone needs to lead him in the wrong direction. He hesitated, then reached out to touch the moonstone ring on her finger. Truth before blood, Iolana. Remember that when you learn the rest? The rest of what? She asked, but Maya was already pulling her toward a bookcase that had slid aside to reveal a narrow passage. There's no time, Tasunka insisted. Go. As Iolana reluctantly followed Maya into the passage, she glanced back one last time. Tasunka stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette proud and resolute. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and in his gaze, she saw something she hadn't expected. Hope. The bookcase slid shut behind them, plunging them into darkness broken only by the soft blue glow of emergency lights embedded in the floor. Maya led the way, moving with the confidence of someone who had traveled this path before. You knew about this passage, Iolana observed as they hurried downward. Tasunka showed it to me a month ago, Maya admitted. He said if anything ever happened, my job was to get you to safety. And you didn't think to mention this arrangement to me? Maya shot her an apologetic look. He swore me to secrecy, said your reaction needed to be genuine if the time came, for your own protection. They reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. Maya turned right without hesitation. How much do you know about all this? Iolana pressed. About the prophecy, my heritage, Orion's plans? Pieces, Maya replied. My grandmother was your mother's confidant. She passed certain truths to me before she died, made me promise to watch over you. When Tasunka approached me in secret, I realized he was working against his father's agenda, not for it. The passage widened as they descended deeper, the air growing cooler and heavy with the scent of earth and water. Iolana could hear the rushing of an underground stream somewhere ahead. "We're almost to the ritual grounds," Maya whispered. "Nodin should be—" She stopped abruptly, throwing out an arm to halt Iolana. Ahead, a figure emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't Nodin. Victor Blackthorn, Orion's most loyal general and a notoriously brutal enforcer, stood blocking their path. His massive frame filled the narrow passage, a cruel smile playing on his scarred face. "The Alpha-elect and her little spy," he growled. My, what secrets you've been keeping." Maya instantly shifted into a defensive stance. Unlike Iolana, Maya possessed the full shifting abilities of their kind, though she rarely used them. Now, her eyes glowed amber as her features began to sharpen. "Run," she told Iolana through lengthening canines. "I'll hold him off." "I'm not leaving you," Iolana protested. "The prophecy is bigger than either of us," Maya hissed. "Go." Before Iolana could argue further, Maya launched herself at Victor with inhuman speed. The big man laughed as he met her attack, his own partial transformation rippling beneath his skin. Torn between loyalty to her friend and the weight of destiny pressing down on her, Iolana clutched the leather case to her chest and made her decision. With a silent promise to return for Maya, she turned and sprinted down a side passage that, according to the phosphorescent markings on the wall, led to the sacred pools. Behind her, the sounds of fierce combat echoed through the tunnels, snarls, impacts, and the crack of breaking stone. Maya was buying her time with blood and courage. The passage eventually opened into a vast underground cavern illuminated by bioluminescent fungi that cast an eerie blue-green light across ancient stone structures. At the center lay a perfectly circular pool, its dark waters still as glass and reflecting the crystalline formations hanging from the ceiling. Nodin stood at the edge of the pool, his expression grave as Iolana approached. The old man looked smaller somehow, burdened by secrets too long kept. "Where's Maya?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Fighting Victor Blackthorn," Iolana replied grimly. "We need to help her." Nodin shook his head. "We cannot. The ritual must take precedence." A fury surged through Iolana. "More secrets? More rituals? My friend is fighting for her life. For my life. And you want me to just abandon her?" "I want you to fulfill your destiny," Nodin replied steadily. "The fate of all shifters hangs in the balance tonight." "And what exactly is my destiny?" Iolana demanded, clutching the leather case Tasunka had given her. "To be manipulated by old men who twist prophecies to suit their political agendas? To be bound in a corrupted ritual that would destroy my heritage?" Shame flickered across Nodin's ancient features. "I have made grave mistakes, child. I allowed fear and tradition to blind me to the truth. But now I see clearly." He gestured to the ring on her finger. "You've used it, haven't you? You've seen glimpses of the past." "Enough to know I've been lied to my entire life," Iolana replied bitterly. A sudden explosion rocked the cavern, sending small stones pattering into the sacred pool. The fighting above was intensifying. "We have little time," Nodin urged. "Open the case. Read the prophecy as it was truly written, not as generations of alphas have manipulated it." With wary eyes on the old keeper, Iolana set down the leather case and carefully opened it. Inside lay several items: a bundle of ancient parchment, covered in faded symbols, a small ceramic jar sealed with wax, and a curved ceremonial dagger with a moonstone embedded in its hilt, a match to her ring. Unfolding the parchment, Iolana found she could somehow read the ancient script, the meaning flowing into her mind as if she'd always known this forgotten language. "When the world stands at the crossroads of destruction and renewal, the sighted one shall return through blood unbound. Shadow and sight must become one, not in flesh, but in purpose. The old order shall yield to the new bridge between worlds. What was broken shall be healed through truth, not subjugation. The first seer returns not to rule, but to guide all into balanced harmony. Below this text was a detailed description of a ritual, not the binding ceremony she had participated in, but something called the Awakening of Sight. As Iolana read, understanding dawned. The ritual required the blood of the first seer's descendant, her own, mixed with that of a true alpha, Tasunka, willingly given, combined with water from the sacred pool and the essence contained in the sealed jar. This isn't what the clan has been told for generations, she said, looking up at Nodin. This prophecy doesn't call for binding or subjugation at all. No, Nodin agreed heavily. It calls for partnership, for balance. Orion and his forebears feared what that meant. The end of absolute alpha authority. They chose power over truth. Another explosion, closer this time, sent ripples across the sacred pool. Maya, Iolana whispered, torn between completing the ritual and helping her friend. As if summoned by her concern, a bloodied figure staggered into the cavern. Maya's clothes were torn, her face lacerated, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. "Victor is dead," she gasped, "but Orion and his forces are right behind me. We have minutes at most." Relief at seeing her friend alive mingled with the urgency of their situation. Iolana turned to Nodin. "How can we complete this ritual without Tasunka? It requires the blood of a true alpha. I need to continue the supernatural thriller I started, picking up right where Section 2 left off. I'll move into Section 3 now, continuing the story of Iolana, as she deals with the revelation about her heritage as a sighted one, and the corrupted ritual. The story is getting more intense with Orion's attack, and Maya's return after fighting Victor. Desperation tightened its grip around Iolana's heart, as the implications of their predicament became clear. The sacred ritual required both her, blood and Tasunka's, freely given, yet the Alpha was elsewhere, likely engaged in combat with his treacherous father. "There may be another way," Nodin said, his weathered face illuminated by the ethereal blue glow of the pool. "The ritual speaks of true Alpha blood. While Tasunka holds the title now, the power runs through the lineage." Maya limped toward them, clutching her side where a deep gash was slowly healing. "You can't mean Orion," Iolana finished, the realization dawning with grim clarity. "His blood would work." Nodin nodded solemnly. "The father's blood carries the same ancient power as the son's, but obtaining it willingly—" He trailed off, the impossibility hanging in the air between them. Another explosion rocked the cavern, closer than before. Dust and small rocks showered, down from the ceiling, disturbing the sacred waters. "We're out of time for perfect solutions," Maya urged, her eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. "I can hear them coming." Iolana's mind raced. The prophecy had been manipulated for generations, but there had to be truth at its core. She stared down at the moonstone ring on her finger, then at its twin embedded in the ceremonial dagger. "What if willingness isn't about consent in the moment?" she asked suddenly. "What if it's about the blood's original purpose? Its inherent nature?" Nodin's eyes widened. "The old texts do speak of blood memory, the idea that blood carries the truth of one's essential self beyond momentary intentions. So if Orion's true nature, his blood's purpose, was once to protect and lead the clan before corruption took hold, Iolana reasoned. "It might be enough," Nodin confirmed, a flicker of hope crossing his ancient features. The decision crystallized in Iolana's mind with startling clarity. "I need to face him, not run from him." "That's suicide," Maya protested. "Not if I can access the power that's supposedly my birthright." Iolana's fingers closed around the ceremonial dagger. "You two prepare the ritual elements, I'll confront Orion." Before either could object further, she strode toward the tunnel entrance, the ancient weapon clutched firmly in her hand. The worn leather grip felt strangely familiar against her palm. as though her hand had held it countless times before. She hadn't taken more than 20 steps when shadows moved at the tunnel mouth. Figures emerged, shifters in partial transformation, their features caught between human and beast. At their center stood a man Iolana recognized despite never having met him in person. Orion Ravenwolf possessed the same commanding presence as his son, but where Tasunka's power felt controlled and purposeful, his father's radiated raw intimidation. Though supposedly in his 60s, he appeared barely older than 40, a benefit of the shifter bloodline. His silver-streaked hair was pulled back from a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty etched into every line. His eyes, unlike Tasunka's dark brown, were an unsettling amber gold even in human form. "The last sighted one," he announced, his voice echoing through the cavern. "Finally, we meet face to face." Iolana stood her ground, acutely aware of the ceremonial dagger hidden in the folds of her dress. "You went to extraordinary lengths to arrange this meeting, faking your death, joining forces with extremists you once condemned, attacking your own clan." A cold smile spread across Orion's face. "Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures." The Shadow Claw served their purpose, providing the manpower I needed. "They believe I'll help them reveal our kind to the human world." He chuckled. "Fools." "And what is your actual purpose?" Iolana asked, subtly positioning herself between Orion and the sacred pool, where Nodin and Maya worked feverishly to prepare the ritual components. "To finish what I began years ago when I eliminated your troublesome mother." His casual admission of murder sent ice through Iolana's veins. "The sighted bloodline ends tonight. No more prophecies, no more challenges to Alpha authority." "My mother knew what you planned," Iolana said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "She tried to protect me from you." "Selena was idealistic and naive, just like my disappointing son." Orion's features hardened. "Where is Tasunka? Still playing the reluctant hero, I imagine." As if summoned by his father's contempt, a commotion erupted from a side tunnel. Tasunka burst into the cavern, bloodied but unbowed, with several loyal shifters at his side. His gaze immediately sought Iolana, relief flashing across his features upon finding her unharmed. "Father," he acknowledged coldly. "I'd say I'm surprised, but I've long suspected your death was too convenient." Orion's lips curled in a sneer. "My greatest disappointment. I gave you everything, power, position, purpose, and you squandered it on romantic notions of change and balance." "You gave me lies," Tasunka countered, moving carefully to position his followers in a defensive formation. "You twisted our heritage to serve your hunger for control." While father and son faced off, Iolana caught Maya's subtle signal from the poolside. The ritual preparations were complete. They needed only the blood components to proceed. "This quarrel is ultimately not between you two," Iolana interjected, drawing both men's attention. "It's about the future of all shifters. About truth versus deception." Orion's laugh was harsh. "Pretty words from a half-breed who doesn't even understand her own nature. You think the sighted ones were benevolent guides? They were manipulators who used their powers to control shifters in their most vulnerable state." "Is that what you've been afraid of?" Iolana challenged, a new understanding dawning. "That history might repeat itself? That I might command you, as you've commanded others?" Something flashed in Orion's eyes, a primal fear quickly masked by contempt. "You'll never get the chance to try." He lunged forward with supernatural speed, transforming as he moved. Where a man had stood moments before, a massive silver-backed wolf now launched through the air, jaws aimed at Iolana's throat. Time seemed to slow. The moonstone ring on Iolana's finger flared with brilliant light, and from some ancestral memory, she raised her hand toward the attacking beast. Words in an ancient language spilled from her lips, words she had never learned yet somehow knew, to the marrow of her bones. "Hellush Nara Voristar." The command hit Orion mid-leap. His massive form froze in midair for a heartbeat, suspended by invisible force, before crashing to the ground. He thrashed violently, caught between forms, neither fully wolf nor fully man, as if his transformation had been interrupted at a cellular level. Gasps echoed around the cavern. Never in living memory had anyone witnessed a shifter unable to complete their transformation. It was a demonstration of power that confirmed everything the clan had feared about the sighted ones. Iolana stood transfixed, as shocked as the others by what she had done. The power had flowed through her instinctively, awakened by imminent danger. "Now, Iolana," Nodin called from the pool. "We need his blood while he's subdued." Reality snapped back into focus. Iolana approached the thrashing hybrid creature, ceremonial dagger in hand. Orion's eyes, still human despite his partially transformed body, glared at her with unadulterated hatred. "Your blood remembers what you've forgotten," she told him quietly, kneeling beside his massive form. "Before ambition corrupted you, you were a true alpha, a protector. That truth lives in your veins, regardless of what you've become." With swift precision, she drew the blade across his foreleg, collecting the dark blood that welled forth. Something in the ceremonial knife seemed to resonate with the blood, the moonstone in its hilt glowing with the same light as her ring. As she stepped away, Tasunka approached his father. Their eyes met in a moment of understanding. The son witnessing the father's fall, the inevitable changing of the guard. "Keep him contained," Tasunka instructed his followers before turning to Iolana. "Whatever you've begun, finish it quickly. His followers will break through the outer defenses soon." Together they hurried to the sacred pool where Nodin had arranged the ritual components. The ceramic jar from the leather case lay open, revealing a fine, silvery powder that shimmered with an inner light. "The essence of the first seer," Nodin explained, "preserved through generations for this moment." Following the ancient instructions, Iolana mixed her blood with Orion's in the ceremonial bowl, then added a measure of the silvery powder. As the components touched, the mixture began to glow with an unearthly blue light. "Now we need your blood," she said to Tasunka, extending the dagger. "Freely given, with full understanding of what this means. If the ritual succeeds, the absolute authority of Alpha's ends. Leadership will become partnership. Are you willing to sacrifice the power you've inherited?" Tasunka took the blade without hesitation. "Power that depends on deception isn't strength. It's tyranny. I choose truth." He drew the blade across his palm, allowing his blood to mingle with the glowing mixture. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The bowl's contents flared with blinding intensity, the liquid transforming into pure light that rose in spiraling patterns above the sacred pool. Nodin began chanting in the ancient tongue, his voice stronger and clearer than Iolana had ever heard it. Following instinct, she dipped her ringed hand into the sacred waters, then touched the moonstone to her birthmark. Pain and pleasure intertwined as ancient knowledge flooded her consciousness. Not just memories, but an entire lifetime of experiences, wisdom, and purpose. She saw through the eyes of the first seer, the early days of shifting, the formation of clans, the development of rituals to protect both shifters and humans from each other's excesses. She witnessed the corruption that had gradually twisted the original balance, the slow infiltration of fear and control that had replaced mutual respect. Most importantly, she understood her purpose, not to rule over shifters, but to restore the broken bridge between human consciousness and animal nature that existed within each shifter, to help them find harmony rather than conflict between their dual natures. When she emerged from the vision, Iolana found herself standing in the center of the sacred pool, the waters swirling around her legs, yet leaving her clothing dry. Tasunka stood at the edge, his expression one of awe and something deeper, a recognition that transcended their brief, complicated relationship. The cavern had fallen silent. Even Orion, still trapped in his hybrid form, had ceased struggling to watch, the transformation taking place. The Shadowclaw followers who had accompanied him stood transfixed, weapons lowered. "It is done," Nodin announced, his voice breaking the spell. "The awakening is complete." Iolana stepped from the pool, aware of subtle changes within herself. Her senses, already enhanced, had expanded exponentially. She could perceive not just the physical presence of the shifters around her, but the constant dialogue between their human and animal natures, the internal struggle that defined shifter existence. "What happens now?" Tasunka asked quietly as she approached him. Before she could answer, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the cavern, not from Orion, but from the tunnel entrance. Dozens of yellow eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by the largest wolf Iolana had ever seen. Black as midnight with eyes like molten gold, the beast padded into the light, followed by at least 20 others. "The Northern Territories delegation," Maya whispered. "They've arrived early." The massive black wolf fixed its gaze on Iolana, then began to transform. Moments later, a tall woman with coffee-colored skin and close-cropped silver hair stood before them. Despite her apparent age, she moved with fluid grace, her bearing regal and imposing. "I am Kiona Blackwood, Alpha of the Northern Clans," she announced. "We sensed the awakening from across the mountains, the prophecy fulfilled at last." Her calculating gaze swept over the scene, from Orion trapped in his half-transformation to the still-glowing sacred pool, before settling on Tasunka. "Your message reached us, young Alpha. You spoke of corruption within your father's leadership, of the true prophecy being revealed. We came to witness for ourselves." Tasunka stepped forward. "The contract between our territories was based on deception. I propose a new alliance, one founded on truth and mutual respect." Kiona's expression remained impassive. "And what of the sighted one? The old fears run deep among my people. Many believe her kind would enslave shifters to human will." All eyes turned to Iolana. The weight of generations of mistrust and manipulation hung on her response. Drawing on her newly awakened knowledge, Iolana approached the Northern Alpha without fear. The purpose of the sighted ones was never dominance, but balance. "May I show you?" Kiona hesitated, then inclined her head in cautious assent. Iolana reached out, gently touching the older woman's temple with her fingertips. The moonstone ring glowed softly as she shared a glimpse of the truth she had witnessed. The original harmony between human and beast, the intended partnership between sighted ones and shifters. When she withdrew her hand, tears shone in Kiona's eyes. "So much has been lost," the Northern Alpha whispered. "So much twisted by fear." A commotion from the far side of the cavern interrupted the moment. Orion, momentarily forgotten, had begun convulsing violently. His hybrid form contorted in unnatural ways, foam flecking his jaws. "What's happening to him?" Tasunka demanded, starting toward his father despite everything. Nodin intercepted him, holding him back with surprising strength. "The corruption has gone too deep. His body rejects itself, the human fighting the wolf fighting the human. Without balance, there is only destruction." Iolana felt the disharmony like discordant music, Orion's dual natures tearing each other apart after years of one suppressing the other. For all his physical strength, his inner conflict had weakened him beyond repair. "Can you help him?" Tasunka asked her, his expression torn between hope and resignation. Iolana approached the thrashing figure, extending her awareness toward the chaotic energies tearing Orion apart. What she found was devastating. Decades of forcing his wolf nature into submission had created irreparable fractures in his spirit. The awakening ritual had merely accelerated the inevitable collapse. "I'm sorry," she told Tasunka softly. "The imbalance has gone too far. There's nothing to salvage." As if hearing her diagnosis, Orion let out a final, agonized howl, before. His form began to disintegrate. Not into death as humans understood it, but something more fundamental. His physical body dissolved into motes of light that scattered through the cavern like falling stars before fading into nothingness. The Shadowclaw followers who had accompanied him backed away in horror. Without Orion's commanding presence, their unity crumbled. Some fled into the tunnels, while others dropped to their knees in surrender. A heavy silence fell over the cavern, broken only by the gentle lapping of the sacred pool. Generations of deception and fear had culminated in this moment of truth. Painful, necessary truth. What becomes of the clan now? One of Tasunka's loyal shifters finally asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Tasunka looked to Iolana, then to Kiona, then back to his people. We rebuild. Not as we were, but as we should have been. Not under the absolute rule of an alpha, but in partnership between leadership and wisdom. He gestured to Iolana. The awakened sighted one will help us find balance between our natures, as was always intended. And the Northern Territories? Someone called out. Kiona stepped forward to stand beside Tasunka. We will honor the alliance, though not through the binding contract as originally planned. New agreements will be forged based on mutual benefit and respect. As the implications of these changes rippled through the gathered shifters, Iolana became aware of a subtle shift in the cavern's atmosphere. The sacred pool's waters began to stir, swirling of their own accord. From its depths, a column of water rose, defying gravity to form a humanoid shape that solidified into the translucent figure of a woman. Though insubstantial as mist, her features were unmistakable. They were Iolana's own, yet older, wiser, bearing the weight of centuries. The first seer had manifested through the waters that had always been her conduit to the physical world. When she spoke, her voice resonated not through air, but directly in the minds of all present. The circle closes. What was broken begins to heal. But beware. The path ahead holds challenges greater than those behind. Ancient enemies stir beyond the veil, sensing the awakening. The true test is yet to come. Her gaze fixed on Iolana with profound intensity. You carry my essence, but must forge your own path. Neither fully human nor shifter, but the bridge between worlds. Remember, balance is not the absence of struggle, but the harmony of opposing forces. The apparition turned to Tasunka. Last of the old guard, first of the new way. Your heart sees truth where your forebears saw only power. Guard her well, for shadows gather where light begins to shine. Finally, she addressed all present. A choice stands before each shifter. Continue in division or embrace wholeness. The human mind and the beast heart are not enemies to be controlled, but aspects to be integrated. This is the forgotten wisdom. This is the path forward. With these words, the manifestation dissolved back into the sacred pool, leaving a profound silence in her wake. Maya was the first to find her voice. She said, "Ancient enemies stir." What did she mean? Nodin's expression grew troubled. There are stories, legends considered too frightening to share widely, of those who hunt both human and shifter. Creatures from beyond the veil who feed on disharmony and fear. The Hollow Ones, Kiona added, her voice hushed. My grandmother spoke of them. Beings that can possess both humans and animals, driving them to acts of terrible violence. They were banished centuries ago by the united power of shifters and sighted ones. And with that alliance broken, with balance destroyed through generations of fear and manipulation, Tasunka began. The barriers weakened, Iolana finished, new understanding flowing from her awakened connection to the first seer. Orion's corruption, the rise of extremism among shifters, these weren't random developments. Something has been influencing, events feeding on our divisions. A chill settled over the gathering as the implications became clear. The awakening ritual hadn't just restored ancient wisdom, It had alerted ancient enemies to their vulnerability. Tasunka moved to stand beside Iolana, his presence solid and reassuring. Then we face this threat together, not as separate factions, but as one people with a shared purpose. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The forced political alliance giving way to something genuine. Not romance, not yet, but mutual respect and a shared vision that contained the potential for deeper connection. The first seer said you should guard me well, Iolana said quietly, a slight smile touching her lips. Does that mean you're now my protector rather than my would-be mate? I think it means we protect each other, Tasunka replied. Partnership, not possession. Isn't that what this has all been about? Before she could respond, a tremor ran through the cavern, subtle at first, then intensifying. Dust and small rocks showered from the ceiling as the sacred pool began to bubble and churn violently. Something's coming through, Nodin warned, backing away from the turbulent waters. The veil between worlds is thinnest here, at the sacred site. The pool's surface broke in an explosive surge, water spraying outward as a dark shape rose from the depths. Unlike the luminous manifestation of the first seer, this entity absorbed light rather than emitted it, a writhing mass of shadow that gradually coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form with elongated limbs and a featureless face. A hollow one had crossed the barrier, drawn by the energy of the awakening ritual. As it fully emerged, the temperature in the cavern plummeted. The creature surveyed the gathered shifters with eyeless scrutiny before its attention fixed on Iolana. When it spoke, its voice scraped against the mind like rusted metal. Sighted one, awakened at last. Your light calls us from the dark places. Your presence draws us across the divide. What was banished returns, what was forgotten remembers. The creature took a shambling step forward, its form rippling like oil on water. Several shifters began to transform instinctively, responding to the threat with their most powerful defense. Yes, the entity hissed with apparent satisfaction. Change your shapes, split your souls, feed our hunger with your divided selves. Understanding flashed through Iolana with chilling clarity. The creature fed on the moment of vulnerability during transformation, when shifters were caught between forms, their dual natures temporarily separated and exposed. Stop, she commanded. The shifters. Remain human. It wants you to shift. Too late for some. 3 shifters were already mid-transformation. The hollow one moved with blinding speed, tendrils of darkness extending from its amorphous body to pierce the shifting figures. They froze in place, expressions of agony contorting their half-transformed features as something essential was extracted from them. Not life force exactly, but the connective energy that bound their dual natures together. The shifters collapsed, their bodies reverting to human form, but with a terrible emptiness in their eyes, as if the spark of consciousness had been extinguished, leaving only hollow shells. Horror rippled through the gathering, as the entity grew more substantial with each feeding, its shadowy form gaining definition and solidity. We need to banish it back across the veil, Nodin urged, before it feeds enough to fully manifest in our world. Iolana felt ancient knowledge stirring within her. Fragments of memory from the first seer showing how hollow ones had been countered centuries ago. The moonstone ring glowed on her finger, responding to the threat. I need all remaining shifters to form a circle around the pool, she commanded. Focus on the harmony within yourselves, the unity between your human mind and animal heart. As shifters scrambled to follow her instructions, Tasunka remained steadfastly at her side. What can I do? Iolana met his gaze. I need an anchor, someone with strong integrated energy to ground me while I attempt to communicate with the entity. Communicate, not attack? Hollow ones aren't evil in the human sense. They're manifestations of disharmony, drawn to division. They can't be destroyed, only redirected. She extended her hand. "Will you anchor me?" Without hesitation, Tasunka clasped her offered hand. The connection between them flared with unexpected intensity, their energies complementing each other in perfect balance. As the shifters formed a protective circle, Iolana stepped forward, facing the Hollow One directly. Drawing on her newly awakened abilities, she extended her perception toward the entity, seeking understanding rather than confrontation. What she found was both simpler and more complex than expected, a consciousness driven by insatiable hunger for energy created by internal conflict. The entity existed as a natural counterbalance to harmony, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply fulfilling its function in the greater scheme of existence. "You feed on division," she addressed it directly, "on the struggle between natures. But there are places between worlds where such energies exist in abundance, without harming living beings." The Hollow One's attention fixed on her with unnerving intensity. "The Sighted One offers alternative sustenance?" "I offer direction to feeding grounds that won't deplete our world," Iolana confirmed. "The liminal spaces between realms contain the energies you seek without requiring you to harvest them from conscious beings." The entity seemed to consider this proposition, its form undulating with internal deliberation. "The hunger drives us. The awakening calls us. The old barriers fail." "I can strengthen those barriers," Iolana promised, "but only if you return willingly to your realm. A new pact. You respect our boundaries, and we ensure the liminal energies remain accessible to you." For a tense moment, the outcome hung in balance. Then, with surprising suddenness, the entity began to recede. "We accept the pact, Sighted One. But know this. Others of our kind have already crossed. The hungry ones seek what we all seek. Not all will listen to reason. Not all will honor boundaries." With this ominous warning, the Hollow One dissolved back into the sacred pool, the waters calming as the presence retreated across the veil. Exhaustion swept through Iolana as the connection broke. She swayed on her feet, grateful for Tasunka's steadying presence beside her. "It worked," she murmured. "But there are more out there. The barriers between worlds are weakening." Tasunka's expression was grim as he surveyed the three empty-eyed shifters, casualties of the brief encounter. "Then we face a greater threat than clan politics or extremist factions. We face the consequences of generations of imbalance," Nodin corrected, approaching with Kiona at his side. "The corruption of our traditions didn't just divide us from each other, it weakened the foundations of our world." Kiona nodded solemnly. "My scouts have reported strange occurrences throughout our territories. Unexplained disappearances, animals behaving unnaturally, humans experiencing collective delusions. We attributed these to human expansion and environmental factors, but now we know better," Tasunka finished. He turned to address the gathered shifters. "Our priorities have changed. Internal divisions must be set aside. We face a threat to all shifters, perhaps to all living beings." A murmur of agreement spread through the cavern. Even former Shadowclaw members nodded their assent, the encounter with the Hollow One having dramatically shifted their perspective. "We should return to the surface," Maya suggested, casting nervous glances at the now placid pool. "Secure the compound and tend to the wounded." As the group began to move toward the exit tunnels, Iolana felt a strange resonance from the ceremonial, dagger still clutched in her hand. Without fully understanding why, she knelt beside the sacred pool and submerged the blade in its waters. The moonstone in the hilt flared brilliantly, and in her mind, she heard the First Seer's voice once more. "The journey begins. Trust what you know, learn what you don't, and remember, the greatest deception is believing we face our battles alone." Withdrawing the dagger, Iolana found the blade transformed, the metal now gleaming with the same iridescent quality as the sacred waters, the moonstone pulsing gently like a heartbeat. As she rose to her feet, Tasunka appeared at her side. "What did you see?" "Not the end," Iolana replied softly, "but a beginning. The awakening wasn't the culmination of the prophecy. It was just the first step." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Then, we take the next step together." The weight of responsibility settled over Iolana like a mantle, not just for the Otsana clan or even for shifters as a whole, but for the delicate balance between worlds that had been entrusted to her care. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, fraught with danger from enemies both known and unknown. Yet as she looked at the diverse group ascending from the sacred cavern, Northern Territory wolves alongside Otsana shifters, former enemies, united by common purpose, Iolana felt something she hadn't expected: hope. The truth had been painful, the awakening traumatic, but from the ashes of deception, something new and vital had emerged. Not perfect harmony, but the first tentative steps toward genuine balance. Hand in hand with Tasunka, she followed the others toward the surface, toward whatever challenges awaited in a world where the veil between realities had grown dangerously thin. The contract that had bound them initially had been built on lies, but perhaps from those broken promises, a stronger covenant could emerge, one founded on truth, partnership, and the courage to face darkness together. Morning dawned over the Otsana compound with deceptive serenity. Golden light filtered through towering redwoods, illuminating the aftermath of the previous night's violence. Broken windows, scorched buildings, and scattered debris told the story of Orion's assault, while hastily established medical stations attended to the wounded. Iolana stood on the balcony of Tasunka's quarters, now serving as their command center, surveying the damage with Maya at her side. Despite the physical destruction, what truly concerned her was invisible to ordinary perception. Faint tears, in the fabric of reality, subtle distortions that shimmered at the edge of her enhanced awareness. "You can sense them, can't you?" Maya asked quietly, noting Iolana's focused gaze on seemingly empty spaces. "Breaches in the veil," Iolana confirmed. "Small ones, mostly, but they're spreading, like cracks in a dam." 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the sacred cavern. 3 days of taking stock, of healing wounds both physical and psychological, of explaining the dramatic shift in clan leadership to confused and frightened shifters. Not everyone had accepted the changes willingly. Some had departed rather than adapt to a new paradigm where alpha authority was balanced by the guidance of a sighted one. The door behind them opened as Tasunka emerged from a meeting with Kiona and representatives from smaller regional shifter groups. Exhaustion lined his face, though he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had first drawn Iolana's attention. "The southwestern clans have pledged their support," he reported. "The Eastern Coalition remains hesitant." "They've always been traditionalists," Maya noted. "Traditionalists who don't realize how corrupted their traditions have become," Iolana added with a hint of frustration. "We don't have time for political maneuvering. Not with what's coming." Tasunka moved to stand beside her at the railing, his presence a steady anchor amidst the chaos. Their relationship had evolved rapidly in recent days. Forced proximity and shared purpose accelerating what might otherwise have taken months to develop. Not romance exactly, but something deeper. Mutual trust, forged in fire. "The reports from Kiona's scouts are concerning," he said, lowering his voice. 17 unexplained disappearances across Northern Territory alone, all displaying the same pattern. Individuals last seen entering a trance-like state before wandering into wilderness areas. "Hollow ones seeking hosts," Iolana surmised grimly. "That's not all. Human news reports are documenting mass animal behavior anomalies, entire herds changing migration patterns, predators abandoning territorial instincts." He paused. "And there have been incidents of domestic animals turning on their owners without provocation." A chill ran down Iolana's spine. "The Hollow Ones are more active in this realm than I feared. They're testing boundaries, experimenting with possession. Which is why we need to accelerate our plans," Maya interjected. Nodin believes he's found references to an ancient ritual that might help repair the weakened barriers between worlds. Let me guess, Iolana said. It requires traveling to multiple sacred sites to channel their collective energy. Maya's surprised expression confirmed her assumption. How did you know? The knowledge of the first seer continues to surface in fragments, Iolana explained. Sometimes as clear memories, sometimes as intuitive understanding. She turned to Tasunka. The ritual Nodin discovered likely involves the 4 cardinal sanctuaries, sacred places where the boundaries between worlds are naturally thinner, but historically protected by warding spells. Tasunka nodded thoughtfully. The northern caves, eastern marshlands, southern mesa, and the western sea cliffs, each controlled by a different shifter faction. Which explains why we need political allegiances, Maya realized. We need access to all 4 locations. It's more than just access, Iolana corrected. We need active participation from representatives of each regional bloodline. The original wardings were created through collective effort. Their renewal requires the same. The implications settled heavily between them. Convincing all shifter factions to cooperate, especially those skeptical of the changes within the Otsana clan, would be challenging under normal circumstances. With reality literally fraying around them, the pressure was immense. A commotion from the courtyard below drew their attention. A small group had arrived, humans by their scent, accompanied by one of Tasunka's guards who appeared distinctly uncomfortable with his escort duty. We have visitors, Tasunka observed, his expression tightening. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore and her research team from the Paranormal Studies Department at Rainier University. You invited human researchers here? Maya asked incredulously. Now? I need to continue Section 4 of the supernatural thriller about Iolana and the Shifters. The story was cut off mid-paragraph, where Tasunka was explaining about the human researchers who've arrived. In this section, I should explore the new conflict with human researchers, discovering evidence of shifters. Develop the threat of the Hollow Ones. Further advance Iolana and Tasunka's relationship. Show Iolana developing her Sighted One abilities. End with another suspenseful moment to lead into the final section. I'll continue directly from where the text was cut off, maintaining the same tone, pace, and style. Not exactly, Tasunka replied. They've been investigating anomalous animal behavior patterns across the Pacific Northwest for months. Their research led them to our territory. I didn't invite them, but given the circumstances, I thought it prudent to meet, rather than risk them stumbling upon something they shouldn't. Iolana studied the newcomers with heightened perception. The lead researcher, Dr. Whitmore, was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to academic authority. Her 3 companions appeared to be graduate students, each carrying equipment cases and looking around the compound with poorly concealed curiosity. They don't know about shifters, Iolana observed, sensing no recognition or specific fear in their manner. But they suspect something. Dr. Whitmore has published several controversial papers on collective animal consciousness, Tasunka explained. Her latest research focuses on synchronous behavioral changes across unrelated species. Exactly what's happening as Hollow Ones influence animal populations. Maya frowned. So we're what? Going to explain that ancient shadow entities from another dimension are possessing wildlife? That'll go over well. We tell them nothing about shifters or Hollow Ones, Tasunka declared firmly. But their research might provide valuable data on manifestation patterns we can't track ourselves. We use their resources without revealing our nature. Iolana considered the strategy, watching as the researchers were escorted to a meeting area that had been hastily cleared of any evidence of shifter culture. It's risky, but potentially useful. I should join you for the meeting. Tasunka hesitated. Your eyes, Iolana. Since the awakening, they've been distinctive. She caught her reflection in a nearby window. Her normally dark brown eyes now shimmered with an inner luminescence. subtle but noticeable in certain light. Another manifestation of her awakened heritage. Sunglasses, Maya suggested practically, already retrieving a pair from a drawer. And maybe let me do most of the talking. I've had more experience navigating human academic circles. With a plan hastily formed, they descended to meet the researchers. Tazunka took the lead, projecting the persona of a private wildlife conservation director rather than the leader of an ancient shifter clan. Dr. Whitmore, he greeted with professional courtesy. Welcome to the Otsana Wildlife Research Preserve. I understand you have questions about the territorial anomalies you've documented. Eleanor Whitmore was not easily impressed. Her keen gaze surveyed Tazunka with scientific interest before shifting to Iolana and Maya. Your preserve doesn't appear on any conservation registries, Mr. Ravenwolf. In fact, according to county records, this entire valley is designated as unoccupied federal land. We maintain a low profile by design, Maya interjected smoothly. Our research involves endangered species that require minimal human interference. Our permits are filed through private conservation trusts. One of the graduate students, a lanky young man with intelligent eyes, stepped forward. We've tracked 17 distinct species displaying synchronized behavioral changes that radiate outward from this exact location. That's statistically impossible without some form of intervention. Which is why we're interested in comparing notes, Iolana said, keeping her tone casual despite the tension building beneath the surface. We've observed the same patterns and are equally concerned. Dr. Whitmore's attention fixed on Iolana, her scientific curiosity sharpening. And you are? Iolana Mackenzie, behavioral specialist. I focus on interspecies communication patterns. Interesting, Whitmore mused. Because your name appears in some rather obscure historical documents I encountered during my research. 18th century journals referencing a woman who speaks to beasts among indigenous populations of this region. Same unusual name. The atmosphere shifted subtly as Tazunka and Maya exchanged concerned glances. The researcher had ventured closer to the truth than anticipated. A fascinating coincidence, Iolana replied evenly. Though I'm named after my great-grandmother, so perhaps there's a family connection. Before Whitmore could pursue this line of questioning, a distant howl echoed through the compound. Not the natural call of a wolf, but something distorted and wrong that raised goosebumps on every arm. The researchers stiffened, while the shifters present immediately recognized the unnatural quality. Mountain lion with a respiratory infection, Tazunka explained smoothly. We've been tracking it for treatment. Dr. Whitmore's expression made it clear she didn't believe him, but she pivoted to her purpose. We've brought monitoring equipment. We'd like to set up at coordinates around your preserve. Motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, environmental sensors. All minimally invasive. I'm afraid that won't be possible without... Tazunka began. A sudden commotion interrupted as one of Kiona's scouts burst into the meeting area, clearly agitated before realizing humans were present. He froze momentarily, then composed himself with visible effort. Forgive the interruption, he said stiffly. There's an urgent situation requiring immediate attention. A wildlife emergency. Iolana could sense his distress even without her enhanced perception. Something serious had happened. If you'll excuse us, Maya addressed the researchers. Please make yourselves comfortable. Refreshments will be brought while we handle this situation. As soon as they were out of earshot, Tazunka turned to the scout. Report. 3 humans, found wandering in the North Ridge sector, the scout said urgently, displaying signs of partial possession, speaking in voices not their own, moving unnaturally. We've contained them, but they're deteriorating rapidly. Hollow ones, Iolana confirmed grimly. Attempting human possession but failing to maintain stability. That's not all, the scout continued. The Eastern Coalition emissary has arrived, but something's wrong. His aura is corrupted. Noden says we shouldn't trust him. The complications were mounting by the minute. Human researchers probing too close to shifter secrets, possessed humans requiring intervention, and now potentially compromised political allies. The fragile coalition they were building could unravel before it began. I need to see the possessed humans, Iolana decided. If I can communicate with the entities as I did in the sacred cavern, perhaps I can negotiate their withdrawal before permanent damage occurs. And I'll deal with the Eastern Emissary, Tasunka determined. Maya, can you keep the researchers occupied? The last thing we need is them wandering into something that exposes our nature. Maya nodded, though her expression betrayed concern. Be careful. If Hollow Ones have figured out how to conceal their presence within a host, we're facing a more sophisticated threat than we realized. As they separated to their tasks, Iolana felt the ceremonial dagger, now kept in a sheath at her hip, pulse with subtle warmth. Since its transformation in the sacred pool, the weapon had become more than mere metal. It responded to proximity of interdimensional breaches, serving as both warning system and focus for her developing abilities. The makeshift containment area had been established in a reinforced storage building at the edge of the compound. 2 guards stood watch, their discomfort evident as unnatural sounds emanated from within. Not quite human voices, not quite animal, but a disturbing blend of both. They've gotten worse in the last hour, one guard reported, keeping his distance from the door. Started out just seeming confused, then began changing. Iolana steeled herself. I need to see them alone. But I'll be safer than anyone else, she assured him, retrieving the ceremonial dagger. The sighted one's presence might stabilize them enough for communication. Reluctantly, the guards unlocked the door. As Iolana stepped inside, the atmosphere hit her like a physical force. Heavy, distorted, saturated with the disharmonic energy she now recognized as the signature of Hollow Ones. The 3 human figures huddled in separate corners of the room, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. 2 men and a woman, hikers judging by their attire, each displaying different stages of the same horrifying process. The woman rocked back and forth, murmuring in a language that predated human civilization. One man stood unnaturally still, his head tilted at an impossible angle, while the third crawled along the wall in a quadrupedal motion that mimicked a predator's stalking. Iolana approached cautiously, drawing on the first seer's knowledge flowing through her consciousness. I know what you are, she addressed the entities rather than their human hosts, and I know you cannot maintain stable possession of these forms. The 3 figures froze simultaneously, then turned toward her with perfect synchronization. When they spoke, it was with a single voice emerging from 3 throats. Sighted 1, you interfere again. These humans cannot sustain your presence, Iolana stated firmly. Their consciousness lacks the duality of shifters that you seek to exploit. You're destroying them, and yourselves in the process. The possessed woman cocked her head at an unnatural angle. We adapt, we learn. The hunger drives us to new solutions. I offered your kind an alternative, Iolana reminded them. Access to liminal energies without harming conscious beings. The crawling man laughed, a hollow, echoing sound. Some accepted, others hunger for more substantial sustenance, the taste of fear, the richness of confusion, the potency of a consciousness torn between what it is and what it becomes. Iolana raised the ceremonial dagger, its moonstone glowing in response to the entity's presence. I can force your withdrawal, but I would prefer cooperation. These humans have done nothing to deserve the fate you're inflicting upon them. The 3 hosts began to move, not toward her, but in a triangular pattern around the room's perimeter, creating a ritualistic formation that raised Iolana's internal alarms. They were attempting something. We remember you, the entities continued, through their rotating hosts. First seer, ancient enemy, you banished us before, bound us to the shadows between worlds. We have not forgotten. Understanding dawned with chilling clarity. These weren't random hollow ones seeking opportunistic possession. They were ancient, vengeful entities with specific knowledge of the first seer, and by extension, of Iolana herself. The triangular movement accelerated, the three hosts moving faster until they blurred. The air between them began to distort, reality itself warping, as something began to manifest in the center of their formation. Iolana acted instinctively, driving the ceremonial dagger into the floor at her feet. A pulse of energy exploded outward, disrupting the ritual. The three possessed humans collapsed like puppets with cut strings. For several tense moments, nothing moved. Then slowly, darkness seeped from the fallen bodies, inky, shadowy essence that coalesced into smoky tendrils hovering in the air. The hollow ones had been forced from their hosts, but hadn't yet retreated. Iolana faced the entities directly. "What were you attempting to summon?" The shadows twisted sinuously before responding. "Not summon. Release. The one you call the Devoy. The ancient darkness that feeds even upon our kind. It stirs in its prison, sensing the weakened barriers. When it emerges, all worlds will know endless hunger." Cold dread settled in Iolana's stomach. The knowledge of the first seer provided fragmented memories of a primordial entity, something the hollow ones both feared and worshipped. Something that had nearly destroyed both human and shifter civilizations in a forgotten age before being imprisoned between dimensions. "Return to your realm," she commanded, channeling power through the dagger still embedded in the floor. "Speak of what you know. Tell your kind that the sighted one has awakened and renews the ancient wards. The devourer remains chained." For a moment, resistance radiated from the shadowy forms. Then, with surprising suddenness, they dissipated, slipping, through microscopic cracks in reality, back to their native dimension. Iolana knelt beside the nearest human, the woman, checking for signs of life. Faint pulse, shallow breathing. All three would survive physically, but the psychological trauma of partial possession would leave lasting scars. She had just begun to examine the second victim when the door burst open. Maya stood in the entrance, her expression frantic. "We have a problem," she announced. "The researchers, they're gone. Slipped away during the commotion, and they took recording equipment with them." "They couldn't have gone far," Iolana replied, rising to her feet. "That's not all," Maya continued grimly. Tasunka sent an urgent message. The Eastern emissary isn't just influenced by a hollow one, he's fully possessed by something much stronger. He attacked Kiona during negotiations. 3 guards are dead, and Tasunka is tracking him through the eastern forest. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, on multiple fronts. Human researchers with potential evidence of shifter activity, possessed victims requiring medical attention, and now a dangerous entity loose in their territory. "Get these humans to the medical unit," Iolana instructed. "Have Nodin prepare a memory-blurring tea for when they regain consciousness. Then organize search parties for the researchers. They must be found before they leave our territory." "And Tasunka?" Maya asked, already moving to help the closest victim. Iolana retrieved the ceremonial dagger from the floor, its blade humming with residual energy. "I'll find him. Whatever's possessing the Eastern emissary, it's not a typical hollow one. Tasunka shouldn't face it alone." The eastern forest grew increasingly dense as Iolana tracked Tasunka's trail. Unlike born shifters who relied primarily on scent, her sighted abilities allowed her to perceive energy signatures. The distinctive aura Tasunka left behind appeared to her enhanced senses as faint golden traces among the trees. More disturbing were the other traces she detected, a corrupting influence that blackened vegetation and repelled wildlife wherever it passed. The possessed emissary left a wake of unnatural stillness, as though the very fabric of life recoiled from his presence. The trail led toward the highest ridge of the territory, a rocky outcropping that overlooked both the Otsana compound and the human settlements beyond. a strategic position that offered both visibility and vulnerability. As she climbed higher, Iolana became aware of a subtle dissonance in the air, a wrongness that intensified with each step. The ceremonial dagger at her hip vibrated continuously, now responding to the proximity of whatever had crossed from beyond the veil. She found Tasunka crouched behind a fallen log, observing something on the ridge above. His clothing was torn, blood seeping from claw marks across his shoulder. Despite his injuries, his focus remained absolute. 3 more shifters dead, he reported quietly as she joined him. Whatever's possessing Varric isn't just a hollow one. It's something worse, something that can maintain complete control while accessing shifter abilities. Iolana followed his gaze to where the Eastern emissary stood at the ridge's edge. Varric had been a distinguished elder of his clan, a bear shifter known for wisdom and restraint. Now his powerful frame moved with unnatural fluidity, his head rotating at impossible angles as he systematically arranged objects in a circular pattern on the flat stone. A summoning circle, Iolana realized with growing horror. Like what the possessed humans attempted, but more sophisticated. "Can you sense what he's trying to bring through?" Tasunka asked, wincing as he shifted position. Iolana extended her perception cautiously, careful not to alert the entity to her presence. What she discovered chilled her to the core. "It's creating a gateway," she whispered. "A permanent tear in the veil large enough for the devourer to pass through." Tasunka's expression hardened. "We need to stop it before the ritual completes. Direct confrontation is too dangerous. Whatever's controlling Varric has accelerated abilities. We need to disrupt the ritual itself." Iolana studied the arrangement of objects, stones, bones, and something that glinted metallically in the fading light. There, the centerpiece. It's anchoring the energy pattern. "I'll create a distraction," Tasunka decided, already shifting his weight in preparation. "To move. Draw it away from the circle while you destroy the anchor." Before Iolana could protest this dangerous plan, movement on the opposite side of the ridge caught her attention. To her horror, she recognized Dr. Whitmore and one of her graduate students crouched among the rocks, camera equipment extended toward the macabre scene. "The researchers," she hissed. "They followed the same trail we did." Tasunka swore under his breath. This just got infinitely more complicated. The possessed Varric suddenly went rigid, his head snapping toward the hidden humans with predatory focus. He had sensed them. What happened next unfolded with nightmarish speed. Varric's body contorted, bone and sinew rearranging as he partially shifted. Not into full bear form, but a grotesque hybrid that showcased the entity's control over shifter physiology. Massive clawed limbs extended, jaws elongated, yet the transformation remained controlled, deliberate, nothing like the unbalanced hybrid state that had claimed Orion. The researchers' horrified gasps carried clearly as the monstrous figure turned toward them. Dr. Whitmore scrambled backward, abandoning her equipment, while her student remained frozen in terror. "Now," Iolana urged, breaking from cover as Tasunka launched himself toward the possessed shifter. Tasunka's partial transformation was fluid and practiced, powerful wolf characteristics emerging while maintaining essential human mobility. He intercepted, Varric mid-lunge, diverting the attack away from the helpless researchers. The two enhanced beings collided with seismic force, snarls and roars echoing across the ridge as they tumbled in a blur of fur, claws, and snapping jaws. Though Tasunka fought with desperate skill, the entity controlling Varric wielded the bear shifter's superior mass with calculating precision. Meanwhile, Iolana raced toward the summoning circle, ceremonial dagger drawn. The central anchor, a polished obsidian sphere veined with pulsing red light, grew more active as she approached, as though sensing her intent. From the corner of her eye, she saw Dr. Whitmore staring in shocked disbelief at the impossible battle unfolding between shape-shifting beings. The woman's academic mind was visibly struggling to process what couldn't exist according to conventional science. "Run!" Iolana shouted to the researchers. "Get back to the compound." Whether they understood or were simply responding to the command in her voice, the humans began retreating down the path. One problem temporarily managed, Iolana refocused on the ritual circle. As she reached for the obsidian sphere, an invisible barrier repelled her hand with painful force. The entity had warded its work against interference. Behind her, Tasunka's pained yelp indicated the fight was not going in his favor. Desperate circumstances required desperate measures. Iolana raised the ceremonial dagger, recalling ancient knowledge from the first seer's memories. The blade had been transformed in the sacred pool for precisely this purpose, to pierce the barriers between worlds. She drove the dagger into the invisible ward with all her strength. For a heartbeat, resistance held, then shattered with an audible crack as reality itself split around the blade. The obsidian sphere pulsed violently, its red veins brightening to blinding intensity. "Tasunka, get down!" she shouted, driving the dagger directly into the sphere's center. The resulting explosion sent Iolana flying backward. A shockwave of interdimensional energy erupted outward, disrupting not just the summoning circle, but the very fabric of space-time around it. The ridge trembled as fissures spread through solid rock. When her vision cleared, Iolana found herself sprawled at the edge of a newly formed crater. The summoning circle was destroyed, its components scattered or vaporized. Of Varric, there was no immediate sign. "Tasunka," she called, struggling to her feet. A weak growl directed her attention to a pile of displaced rocks. Tasunka lay partially buried, his form reverting to human as consciousness faded. Blood matted his hair and soaked through his torn clothing. Iolana rushed to his side, frantically clearing debris. His injuries were severe: broken bones, deep lacerations, internal bleeding her enhanced senses could detect but couldn't immediately heal. Without intervention, he would die within hours. As she cradled his head, movement drew her attention to the crater's center. The ground bulged upward as Varric's mangled body emerged, or what remained of it. The entity controlling him had sacrificed much of its host's physical form to survive the explosion. What rose from the earth was barely recognizable as the dignified Eastern emissary. Flesh hung in tatters from exposed bone, yet the body moved with jerky determination. When it spoke, the voice emerged not from the ruined throat, but from the air around it. "Too late," sighed one. "The key has turned. The lock weakens. What was separated bleeds together now." "I destroyed your summoning circle," Iolana countered, positioning herself protectively before Tasunka's unconscious form. The possessed corpse tilted what remained of its head at an impossible angle. One path closed, many others opening. The devourer stirs. Its hunger reaches across the void. Can you feel it? With horrifying clarity, Iolana realized she could feel something. A vast, ancient consciousness, brushing against reality like a predator, testing a barrier for weaknesses. The entity was right. The destruction of the summoning circle had not prevented the deterioration of interdimensional boundaries. "You have won nothing," the entity continued, shambling closer. "This vessel fails, but others await. Perhaps yours? You cannot possess me," Iolana stated with conviction born of the first seer's knowledge. "The sighted bloodline is immune to your kind." "Not you," the corpse agreed, its ruined face twisting into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "Him." It lunged not at Iolana, but past her, decomposing hands reaching for Tasunka's vulnerable form. In that moment of desperate clarity, Iolana acted on pure instinct. The ceremonial dagger flashed in the dying light as she drove it through what remained of Varric's heart. Unlike a physical weapon against a physical body, the transformed blade struck at the entity itself. A scream of multidimensional agony erupted as the dagger's moonstone flared with blinding intensity. Varric's body convulsed, black ichor erupting from every orifice as the possessing entity was forcibly extracted. For a moment, the entity's true form became visible. A writhing mass of tentacles and eyes surrounding a pulsing core of absolute darkness. Then, with a sound like reality tearing, it was pulled back across the dimensional boundary, leaving Varric's empty husk to collapse into dust. The sudden silence was deafening. Iolana fell to her knees beside Tasunka, the ceremonial dagger still clutched in her trembling hand. Its blade had turned obsidian black, absorbing something of the entity it had banished. Tasunka's breathing was shallow, his heartbeat faint. Without immediate intervention, he wouldn't survive the journey. Back to the compound. Iolana closed her eyes, searching through the fragments of the first seer's knowledge for anything that might save him. A memory surfaced, not a ritual or spell, but something more fundamental. The sighted ones had possessed healing abilities, focused through their connection to life energy itself. If she could channel that power... Iolana placed one hand over Tasunka's heart and the other, still holding the dagger, against his forehead. She reached deep within herself, past conscious, thought to the wellspring of power that had awakened during the ritual in the sacred pool. "Life to life," she whispered, the words coming unbidden. Balance restored. Wounds healed not by dominance but by harmony. The moonstone in the dagger's hilt began to glow, its light spreading beneath Tasunka's skin to illuminate his injuries. From within, where darkness had consumed the blade, now light flowed forth, following the pathways of blood and nerve to knit broken tissue and restore vital energy. Iolana felt herself weakening as the healing progressed. Her own life force temporarily diminished to bolster his. This was the true purpose of the sighted ones. Not to command or control shifters, but to complement them, to provide what they lacked in times of need, just as they provided protection and physical strength when required. Partnership, balance, symbiosis, rather than dominance. Tasunka's eyes fluttered open as the healing reached completion. For a moment, he seemed disoriented. Then his gaze focused on Iolana with immediate concern. "You're pale," he observed, reaching up to touch her face. "What did you do?" "What was necessary," she replied simply. "What I was born to do." His hand covered hers where it still rested over his heart. The entity? Banished, but not destroyed. And the devourer still threatens. She helped him sit up, both of them surveying the destroyed ritual site. "We've won a battle, not the war." Tasunka rose unsteadily to his feet, testing limbs that had been broken minutes before. The researchers saw everything, didn't they? Everything. Iolana confirmed grimly. Our existence is exposed. The implications hung heavily between them. For millennia, shifters had survived through secrecy. Now, in the age of digital information and global communication, two humans possessed evidence that could shatter that protection forever. "We should return to the compound," Tasunka decided. "Deal with one crisis at a time." As they made their way down from the ridge, leaning on each other for support, Iolana felt a strange sensation, like being watched by unseen eyes. She glanced back at the crater one last time. Where the summoning circle had been, a barely perceptible distortion remained in the air, a microscopic tear in reality that pulsed with subtle malevolence. The entity had spoken truly. One path had been closed, but others were opening. And beyond those openings, ancient hunger waited. Firelight danced across solemn faces as representatives from 12 shifter clans gathered in the Great Lodge. 1 week had passed since the confrontation on the ridge, a week of feverish preparation, political maneuvering, and increasingly, frequent incursions from beyond the veil. The council that had been hastily assembled represented the largest coalition of shifter factions in generations, united by common threat rather than shared vision. Iolana observed from her position beside Tasunka, noting the undercurrents of tension, skepticism, and fear that rippled through the gathering. Some clan leaders had arrived ready to cooperate. Others came merely to assess the situation for themselves. A few clearly attended only to voice opposition. All, however, recognized that something unprecedented was occurring. Kiona of the Northern Territories spoke first, her commanding presence drawing immediate attention. 3 more settlements have reported possessions in my territory. Not just humans this time, shifters as well, though the entities cannot maintain control through a full transformation. Similar incursions in the coastal regions, added Mateo Sierra, alpha of the Western Seacliffs clan. Marine life behaving abnormally. Fishing vessels lost without explanation. The humans attribute it to changing ocean currents and atmospheric conditions. Let them believe their comforting scientific explanations, rumbled Elijah Thornwood, the massive bear shifter who had replaced Varric as Eastern Coalition representative. Our concern should be securing our own territories, not worrying about human perceptions. Tasunka leaned forward, his recently healed body showing no outward signs of the brutal injuries he'd sustained. Isolation is no longer a viable strategy. The barriers between dimensions are weakening everywhere, not just at traditional boundary points. What affects one territory will soon affect all. And we're supposed to trust this assessment based on what? Challenged a wiry coyote shifter from the southwestern desert clans. The word of a compromised alpha who abandoned traditional leadership to follow the guidance of a half-breed sighted one? Murmurs rippled through the gathering, some supportive of the challenge, others disapproving of its disrespect. Iolana felt Tasunka tense beside her, but before he could respond, Maya stepped forward from her position among the advisors. Perhaps you'd prefer to trust the evidence of your own eyes, Representative, she suggested, activating a projection system that had been installed in the lodge. The central fire dimmed as images flickered to life above it. Footage compiled from multiple sources showing inexplicable phenomena across North America. Animals moving in unnatural synchronization. Humans in trance-like states speaking impossible languages. Environmental anomalies that defied scientific explanation. These incidents have increased by 380% in the past month, Maya continued. The pattern of expansion is consistent with interdimensional bleeding as documented in our oldest records. The coyote shifter sneered. Clever editing and modern technology. I remain unconvinced. His words cut off as a new image appeared. Dr. Eleanor Whitmore's footage from the ridge, showing Tasunka and the possessed Varric in mid-transformation, locked in supernatural combat while Iolana disrupted the summoning circle. The quality was exceptional, the reality undeniable. Shocked silence fell over the assembly. The human researchers, Kiona realized aloud. You found them. Yes and no, Tasunka replied carefully. We recovered their equipment from where they abandoned it, fleeing the ridge. The researchers themselves reached human civilization before we could intercept them. Panic flickered across several faces. Then we are exposed, Elijah growled. Centuries of secrecy undone. Not necessarily, Iolana interjected, rising to address the gathering directly. Dr. Whitmore and her team attempted to share their findings with colleagues and authorities. Their evidence was dismissed as elaborate hoaxes. In an era of digital manipulation, even genuine footage of the impossible is met with skepticism. Relief visibly swept through the assembly, quickly replaced by newfound concern as Iolana continued. However, Whitmore herself remains convinced. She's continued her investigation, connecting with fringe researchers who study similar phenomena. They lack institutional credibility, but collectively, they're piecing together patterns that could eventually expose our existence. Then we should silence them permanently, suggested a cold-eyed representative from a northern forest clan, his meaning unmistakable. That approach would only validate their theories and attract more attention, Tasunka countered firmly. Besides, Dr. Whitmore may prove more valuable as an ally than an enemy. Outrage erupted at this suggestion. Several representatives rose to their feet, voices overlapping in protest. The idea of deliberately revealing their existence to a human, even one already aware, violated the most fundamental tenet of shifter society. Noden, who had remained silent until now, struck his staff against the floor 3 times. The sharp crack cut through the chaos, demanding attention through ancient authority. Our ancestors did not always hide from humans, the old keeper reminded them. There was a time when sighted ones served as bridges between our kinds, when mutual awareness fostered respect rather than fear. Ancient history, scoffed Elijah. Before the Great Purge, before humans decided anything different from themselves should be exterminated. Perhaps, Nodin acknowledged. But consider this. The threats we now face originated when that balance was broken. When shifters retreated into secrecy and sighted ones were hunted to near extinction, the natural order that maintained interdimensional barriers was disrupted. Iolana felt the ceremonial dagger at her hip warm in response to Nodin's words. Since banishing the entity from Varric's corpse, the blade had retained its obsidian coloration, though the moonstone continued to pulse with inner light. It responded to truth as much as to danger, the knowledge of the first seer confirming Nodin's assessment. The ritual to restore the barriers requires components from each cardinal sanctuary, she explained, redirecting the conversation toward practical matters. But more importantly, it needs representatives from each major shifter bloodline, working in harmony with a sighted one at places where the dimensional boundaries naturally thin. And if we refuse to participate? The coyote shifter challenged. If we reject this new paradigm you're proposing? Tasunka's expression hardened. Then the barriers continue to weaken. More hollow ones cross over. Eventually the devourer itself breaks free from its prison. Perhaps your territory will be the last affected, but affected it will be. Uneasy silence followed as the representatives contemplated this grim prediction. For all their disagreements, none could deny the escalating incidents within their territories. When must this ritual be performed? Kiona finally asked, her practical nature asserting itself. The winter solstice, Nodin answered, when the veil between worlds naturally thins, 3 weeks from tonight. So little time, Matteo murmured. And so much to coordinate. Which is why we must begin immediately, Tasunka urged. Each cardinal sanctuary must be prepared according to ancient protocols. Energy channels cleared, protective wards established. As the discussion turned to logistics, Iolana noticed a subtle distortion in the air near the lodge entrance, a shimmer like heat haze that her enhanced perception recognized as an interdimensional breach. Small, containable, but present where none should exist. She quietly rose from her seat, moving toward the anomaly, while the clan representatives debated technical aspects of the upcoming ritual. The ceremonial dagger grew warmer against her hip as she approached the breach. Maya noticed her movement and followed, concern evident in her expression. "What is it?" she whispered. "A tear," Iolana confirmed quietly. "Here, in the heart of our stronghold. They're growing bolder. I need to continue the final section of this supernatural thriller." The text got cut off mid-sentence, where Iolana was observing a tear or breach in reality within the lodge, where all the clan leaders are gathered. I need to finish this scene, and bring the story to a satisfying conclusion that ties up the major plot threads while still leaving room for the reader's imagination. The major elements I need to resolve include the immediate threat of the interdimensional breach in the lodge, the plan for the winter solstice ritual to restore barriers between worlds, the situation with Dr. Whitmore and the human researchers, Iolana and Tasunka's relationship, Iolana's continued development as the sighted one, the ultimate confrontation with the devourer. I'll continue directly from where the text was cut off, maintaining the same tone, pace, and style while working toward a conclusion that feels both complete and open to further imagination. The breach pulsed subtly, expanding and contracting like a living thing. As Iolana watched, microscopic tendrils of darkness extended from its center before withdrawing, testing, probing, seeking weakness. "It's observing us," she whispered. "Learning." Maya's expression grew alarmed. "Here? With all the clan leaders present?" "Not coincidental," Iolana confirmed grimly. These breaches are becoming intentional rather than random, targeted. The ceremonial dagger hummed against her hip, resonating with the interdimensional energy. Without drawing attention from the council, Iolana carefully unsheathed the obsidian blade, keeping it concealed within the folds of her clothing. The weapon had changed since banishing the entity from Varric's corpse, not just in appearance but in essence. It had absorbed something of the darkness it had confronted, becoming both more powerful and more dangerous. "Should we alert the others?" Maya asked, eyeing the ongoing discussions. "Not yet. A panic might feed it." Iolana studied the pulsing anomaly. These tears respond to emotional energy, fear, anger, conflict. They strengthen and expand when exposed to disharmony. The council's debate had intensified, voices rising as territorial concerns and ancient grudges surfaced despite the common threat. The breach expanded noticeably, with each heated exchange. "It's feeding on their discord," Iolana realized. "We need to calm the gathering before this escalates." Before she could intervene, the breach suddenly expanded with alarming speed. The air split with a sound like tearing silk as darkness poured through. Not a physical entity this time, but a wave of pure disruptive energy that swept across the lodge. Every shifter present felt it, conversations halting mid-sentence as primal instincts registered interdimensional intrusion. Tasunka was on his feet instantly. "Iolana?" She stepped forward, ceremonial dagger now raised openly. "Interdimensional. Breach. Everyone remain calm and—" The warning came too late. The darkness coalesced at the center of the lodge, directly above the council fire. From its swirling mass, a voice addressed them. Not with sound, but with resonance that vibrated directly in their minds. "Divided yet gathered. Weakened by your own nature. The barriers fail because you have failed, creatures of dual existence." Several shifters began transforming instinctively, the threat triggering defensive reactions. Iolana felt the entity's satisfaction as it fed on the resulting disharmony. "Stop," she commanded, channeling the sighted one's power through her voice. "Complete transformations will only strengthen it." To her relief, the shifters responded to her authority, halting their changes mid-shift. The gathering now stood in various states between human and animal form, exactly the vulnerable condition the entity would normally exploit, yet none fell under its influence. Tasunka moved to Iolana's side, his partial transformation controlled and deliberate. "What is this?" "Not a hollow one." "A scout," she answered, ancient knowledge surfacing. "A fragment of the Devourer's consciousness sent to assess our defenses." The swirling darkness pulsed with what might have been amusement. The sighted one remembers, but remembers too late. The old barriers crumble. The new ones remain unformed. When winter's longest night arrives, the way opens fully. "The solstice," Nodin breathed. "It knows our plans. We have always known. We have watched through countless cycles as you forgot what we remembered. The balance that once contained us was broken by your own hands." Images flashed through every mind present, ancient memories not their own. Shifters and sighted ones working in harmony to maintain cosmic balance. The gradual corruption of that partnership through fear and hunger for power. The systematic elimination of sighted bloodlines, not by humans as shifter history recorded, but by shifter elders who resented the constraint on their authority. "Lies," snarled Elijah, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Truth," Nodin corrected softly. "Hidden truth our histories were rewritten to conceal." The entity continued. "The Devourer stirs in anticipation. When it crosses, it will feast first on those whose essence bridges worlds. The shifters. Your dual nature makes you perfect sustenance." Iolana stepped forward, the ceremonial dagger held before her. "You've delivered your message. Now return to your master." The darkness contracted, slightly. The Banisher Blade. You have armed yourself well, last-sighted one. But one weapon and one bearer cannot stand against what comes. She doesn't stand alone, Tasunka declared, moving forward to position himself beside Iolana. One by one, other representatives joined them, Kiona first, then Mateo, even the skeptical Elijah. The entity's darkness dimmed noticeably as the shifters formed a semicircle of unified purpose. Harmony of intention counteracting its disruptive influence. A momentary alliance, easily broken. The darkness began to withdraw toward the breach. We will meet again on the solstice, sighted one. Prepare as you will. The outcome remains, written. With a final pulse of malevolent energy, the entity retreated. The tear sealed itself, reality knitting back together with an almost audible sigh. The shifters remained frozen in formation for several heartbeats, processing what had transpired. Then, with remarkable synchronicity, they completed their reversions to human form, a collective demonstration of control that would have been unthinkable minutes earlier. It wanted us afraid, Kiona observed, divided. And instead it achieved the opposite, Mateo added, looking around at the unified gathering with surprise. Tasunka turned to address the assembly. Nothing unites like a common enemy, but unity forged solely through fear rarely survives once the threat appears defeated. We need something stronger. Understanding, Iolana suggested. Truth instead of ancient deceptions. Partnership instead of hierarchy. The ceremonial dagger in her hand gradually lightened, the absorbed darkness dissipating as harmony spread through the gathering. The blade returned to its original iridescent state, though now veined with subtle patterns that hadn't existed before, a visual record of its confrontation with interdimensional forces. Nodin approached, studying the transformed weapon with scholarly interest. The Banisher Blade changes with each engagement, adapting, learning, just as our adversaries do. It's becoming something new, something not seen since the first seers. Time, as are we all, Iolana noted, looking around at the assembled shifters. The encounter had changed something fundamental in the gathering's dynamics. Where before there had been reluctant cooperation, now she sensed genuine consideration of a new path forward. Elijah cleared his throat. The entity's visions, if they contain truth rather than manipulation, then our entire understanding of shifter history has been corrupted. Not just history, Nodin confirmed. Purpose. The role of alphas was never meant to be absolute authority, but rather protective guidance. Shifter clans weren't meant to isolate themselves from humans or each other, but to serve as guardians of the balance between worlds. And the sighted ones? Someone asked. Bridges, Iolana answered, knowledge flowing from her awakened connection to the first seer. Not rulers or servants, but essential counterparts maintaining equilibrium between human consciousness and animal nature. The implications settled heavily over the gathering. Generations of artificial division and hierarchy had not only weakened shifter society internally, but had contributed directly to the deterioration of interdimensional barriers. The winter solstice approaches, Tasunka reminded them, returning to practical concerns. Whatever revelations we've experienced tonight, our immediate task remains clear. The cardinal sanctuaries must be prepared. The ritual must be performed. Agreement rippled through the assembly, but Kiona raised a pertinent question. And what of the human researcher? This Dr. Whitmore? If the entity's visions suggest humans once knew of our existence within a balanced relationship, does that change our approach? All eyes turned to Iolana. As the reborn sighted one, her perspective on human-shifter relations carried particular weight. I believe Dr. Whitmore may be more important than we initially realized, she said carefully. The ritual requires representatives of each cardinal bloodline working in harmony with the sighted one. But historically, there was another component, human, witnesses who anchored the process in consensual reality. Shocked murmurs spread through the gathering. The idea of deliberately including humans in their most sacred ritual contradicted centuries of isolation. The barriers between dimensions are maintained by consensual reality, Iolana explained, by enough conscious minds agreeing on what is and isn't possible. When shifters withdrew completely from human awareness, that consensus was weakened. A critical perspective was lost. You're suggesting we need human participation to succeed, Tasunka clarified, his expression thoughtful rather than resistant. Not just any humans, Iolana qualified. Those with the capacity to comprehend without rejecting, to witness the impossible and integrate it rather than deny it. Dr. Whitmore and her team have already demonstrated that capacity. The discussion that followed was heated but remarkably constructive. By dawn, a framework for action had been established that would have been unthinkable days earlier. Coordinated preparation of the cardinal sanctuaries, temporary alliance structures that transcended traditional territories, and, most controversially, cautious, outreach to selected human researchers under controlled circumstances. As the council dispersed to begin implementation, Tasunka and Iolana found themselves momentarily alone in the lodge. Exhaustion lined both their faces after the night's events, yet a sense of accomplishment prevailed. Your leadership made this possible, Iolana told him quietly. They followed because you were willing to change first. Tasunka shook his head. They followed because you showed them a truth they couldn't ignore. I merely created space for that truth to be heard. Their hands found each other's in the glow of the dying council fire, a simple gesture that communicated volumes about their evolving relationship. Not the political arrangement originally intended, but something that had grown organically, through shared struggle and mutual respect. 3 weeks to prepare for a ritual not performed in centuries, Tasunka mused, against an entity that has waited millennia for this opportunity. We have one advantage the entity may not comprehend, Iolana replied. We're adapting faster than it anticipated. Shifters, humans, sighted ones. We were meant to evolve together, not apart. That potential for integration has remained dormant, not dead. The ceremonial dagger at her hip hummed softly, as if in agreement. The northern caves stretched deep, beneath the Cascade Mountains, their crystalline chambers untouched by human exploration. Ancient petroglyphs adorned walls that pulsed with subtle bioluminescence, depicting shifters in various forms, working alongside human figures under the watchful guidance of radiant beings, sighted ones preserved in stone memory. Kiona led the way through the labyrinthine passages, her wolf form navigating by instinct what no map could capture. Behind her followed representatives from each major shifter bloodline, 12 in total, each carrying ritual components harvested from their native territories. Iolana walked among them, the ceremonial dagger now suspended from a chain around her neck, its moonstone pulsing in rhythm with the cave's natural energies. The weapon had become more than a tool. It was now a conduit, attuned to both her awakened abilities and the interdimensional forces they sought to contain. At the rear of the procession came Dr. Eleanor Whitmore and 2 carefully selected colleagues, human witnesses whose scientific training provided the necessary skepticism to anchor the ritual in consensual reality, yet whose minds remained open enough to accept evidence that contradicted conventional understanding. The initial meeting with the researchers had been tense, conducted under stringent security measures. Dr. Whitmore had arrived expecting either confirmation of her discoveries or perhaps elimination to silence her findings. Instead, she'd been offered partnership in addressing a threat that transcended the human-shifter divide. The temperature fluctuations are consistent with theoretical models of dimensional bleeding, she observed now, instruments in hand as they descended deeper into the cave system, quantum instability increasing as we approach the ritual site. Her clinical analysis provided an unexpected comfort, scientific language imposing rational structure on phenomena that might otherwise overwhelm human comprehension. The other, researchers maintained similar professional detachment, though their elevated heart rates betrayed the underlying awe and anxiety Iolana could sense. We're approaching the first junction, Kiona announced as the passage widened into a vast circular chamber. The northern sanctuary connects here with natural pathways to the other cardinal points. At the chamber's center stood a formation that defied geological explanation. A perfect spiral column of interlocked crystals that rose from floor to ceiling. Its surface rippled with colors that shifted through spectrums beyond normal human perception. The northern anchor, Noden identified for the benefit of the human researchers. One of 4 cosmic pillars established by the first seers to stabilize dimensional boundaries. Dr. Whitmore approached cautiously, instruments extended. The energy readings are impossible. It's generating more power than anything this size could contain according to known physics. Known physics applies to one-dimensional layer, Iolana explained. The anchors exist simultaneously in multiple realities. The 12 shifter representatives positioned themselves around the crystal formation, each placing their ritual, components, stones, bones, botanical elements harvested under specific lunar conditions, at designated points forming a larger spiral pattern across the chamber floor. Iolana took her position at the spiral's center, directly before the crystal column. The ceremonial dagger hummed against her chest, responding to the ancient energies awakening around them. Similar preparations are underway at the other cardinal sanctuaries, Tasunka noted, checking the communication device that linked their team with those at the eastern marshlands, southern mesa, and western sea cliffs. Synchronized timing will be essential. The winter solstice was upon them, the longest night of the year when boundaries between worlds naturally thinned. Their ritual needed to harness that liminal quality while simultaneously reinforcing the barriers the devourer sought to breach completely. The human observers should position themselves at the outer boundary, Noden instructed, guiding the researchers to a raised observation point that offered both safety and comprehensive visibility. Your role is to witness and record, to anchor what occurs in consensual reality through conscious observation. Dr. Whitmore nodded, arranging sophisticated monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency. We're prepared to document everything, though I suspect conventional instruments will capture only a fraction of what actually transpires. Perception matters more than equipment, Iolana assured her. Your conscious recognition of what unfolds helps stabilize it in this reality. As final preparations continued, Iolana became aware of subtle changes in the cave's atmosphere. The air grew heavier, charged with potential. The boundaries between dimensions were already beginning to thin as the solstice night deepened above ground. And with that thinning came awareness of observation from beyond. Countless entities pressing against weakened barriers, drawn by the energy concentrating. In the sanctuary, most were hollow ones, opportunistic feeders seeking easy passage. But behind them loomed something else. A vast consciousness whose attention settled like a physical weight upon the gathering. It's watching, Iolana warned. The devourer senses our preparations. Let it watch, Tasunka replied with quiet determination. Let it know we stand ready. The ceremonial dagger pulsed more insistently against Iolana's skin as she removed it from its chain. The blade had continued evolving since the council meeting, absorbing and transmuting energies from each breach it helped seal during their preparations. What had begun as a simple ritual implement was becoming something unprecedented, a key capable of either locking or unlocking the barriers between worlds, depending on how it was wielded. Status from the other sanctuaries? She asked. Tasunka checked the communications device. Eastern marshlands ready, southern mesa ready, western sea cliffs. He frowned. Western team reports intensifying anomalies. The barrier there is deteriorating faster than anticipated. The devourer focuses its efforts on the weakest point, Noden observed grimly. We must begin immediately. With silent coordination born of weeks of preparation, the shifter representatives took their positions around the spiral pattern. Each carried the dual nature of their bloodline: wolf, bear, mountain lion, eagle, and others less common. creating a living embodiment of the diversity that had once maintained natural balance. Transformational equilibrium is essential, Iolana instructed. Neither fully human nor fully beast, but the conscious integration of both natures. One by one, the representatives entered controlled partial transformations, maintaining human consciousness while manifesting aspects of their animal forms. Unlike typical shifter change, which prioritized one nature over the other, this balanced state required immense concentration and control. As the final participant achieved equilibrium, the crystal column began to resonate, emitting harmonics that vibrated through bone and tissue. The ritual components placed in the spiral pattern responded, glowing with internal light that traced connections between them. Energy channels activating, Dr. Whitmore reported from her observation point. Voice steadier than her elevated heart rate suggested, consistent patterns emerging at all 4 cardinal points according to our remote sensors. Iolana raised the ceremonial dagger, positioning herself at the exact center of the spiral. Ancient knowledge guided her movements as she began the ritual. Incantation, words in a language that predated human civilization, yet remained encoded in the collective memory of all present. Verat solime naret, kumel sarasin vitara. As she spoke, reality itself seemed to flex around them. The boundaries of the cave blurred, overlapping with glimpses of the other sanctuaries where identical rituals unfolded simultaneously. For brief moments, all 4 cardinal points existed in the same space, connected by threads of pure energy that flowed through the spiral patterns. The human researchers gasped collectively as their perception expanded beyond normal limits, a temporary gift of the ritual that allowed them to witness what normally remained hidden. Their scientific instruments sparked and failed, overwhelmed by phenomena they weren't designed to measure. "My God," Dr. Whitmore whispered, her academic detachment crumbling before the wonder of undeniable reality. "It's all connected. Always has been." In the spaces between spaces, darkness gathered. The Devourer's attention focused fully upon their efforts now, recognizing the threat to its imminent freedom. Pressure built against the thinning barriers, not just at the Western Sanctuary as initially reported, but at all 4 cardinal points simultaneously. You cannot rebuild what was willingly broken, the Devourer's consciousness projected into their minds. The balance required sacrifice you are unwilling to make. The crystal column pulsed erratically as interdimensional stress increased. Iolana felt the ritual wavering as the entity's words seeded doubt among the participants. "What sacrifice?" Tasunka demanded, maintaining his position despite the disruption. Through their connected consciousness, the answer surfaced from the first seer's memories within Iolana. The original barriers had been established through voluntary binding of life forces. The sighted ones had essentially anchored the boundaries, with fragments of their own souls, becoming living keystones between worlds. "It requires a permanent guardian," Iolana realized aloud. "A consciousness that exists simultaneously on both sides of the barrier, maintaining equilibrium through constant vigilance." Understanding dawned into Tasunka's eyes. A sacrifice of freedom, not life. Iolana nodded grimly. The first seer knew this would be necessary again someday. It's why the bloodline was preserved, why the awakening ritual existed. Not just to restore knowledge, but to prepare a new guardian. The implications settled heavily over the gathering. Iolana would need to bind herself permanently to the interdimensional boundary, neither fully in one world nor the other, but existing in the liminal space between realities. Present yet separate. Conscious yet distributed across cosmic architecture. "There must be another way," Tasunka argued, the first hint of their hard-won harmony threatening to fracture under emotional stress. "This is the way," Iolana replied, with quiet certainty. "It always has been." Before further objection could disrupt the ritual's delicate balance, Iolana raised the ceremonial dagger and drew it across her palm. Her blood, carrying the awakened essence of the first seer, flowed along the blade's surface, activating dormant patterns within the metal. Sorveth namir kalas, entaru savalis vorta. The invocation released cascading energy through the spiral pattern, connecting all 4 sanctuaries in a synchronized matrix of light. Reality bulged as interdimensional pressure reached critical levels, the devourer making its final push against weakened barriers. In that moment of cosmic tension, Iolana thrust the bloody dagger into the heart of the crystal column. Light exploded outward as dimensions realigned. The ceremonial blade became a fixed point around which reality reorganized itself, a key turning in a lock that had been gradually failing for centuries. Energy surged through the connected spirals at all 4 cardinal points, re-establishing boundary definitions that had eroded through neglect and corruption. Iolana felt her consciousness expanding beyond physical limitations, stretching across the newly reinforced barriers, becoming part of their fundamental structure. Not death, but transformation into something beyond conventional existence. The ultimate expression of the Sighted One's purpose, to bridge worlds through conscious integration. As the blinding light receded, those gathered in the northern sanctuary found themselves returned to normal perception. The spiral pattern now existed as permanent crystalline formations embedded in the chamber floor. The ceremonial dagger remained, lodged in the central column, pulsing gently with contained power. Of Iolana's physical form, there was no sign. "She's gone," Maya whispered, voicing the collective shock. "Not gone," Nodin corrected gently. "Transformed, distributed, the guardian consciousness that maintains what we have rebuilt." Tasunka approached the crystal column, placing his hand upon its surface. For a brief moment, warmth spread through his palm, a familiar sensation that contained recognition, reassurance, and something more personal that belonged to him alone. "She's everywhere now," he confirmed, voice thick with emotion that balanced grief and wonder. "Part of the barrier itself." Dr. Whitmore stepped forward from the observation point, her scientific training struggling to contextualize what she had witnessed. "The readings before our equipment failed. They suggested a complete restructuring of quantum boundaries, a reinforcement of reality parameters that should be theoretically impossible. Yet you observed it," Nodin noted, "and in observing, helped anchor it in consensual reality." The human researcher nodded slowly. "What happens now? With the barriers restored, do we simply return to separation? Humans unaware of shifters? Shifters hiding their nature?" It was the question that hung unspoken in every mind present. The ritual had succeeded in its immediate purpose. The dimensional boundaries were reinforced, the devourer contained once more behind cosmic walls. But the social barriers between shifters, and humans, between shifter factions themselves, remained to be addressed. Tasunka turned from the crystal column, his expression reflecting both loss and newfound purpose. "The old ways failed us. Separation and secrecy contributed to the weakening of natural balance. We need a new approach, gradual integration rather, than absolute division." "Controlled revelation to selected humans," Kiona suggested. "Beginning with those who already suspect or have witnessed unexplainable phenomena." "Scientific partnership," added Matteo, gesturing toward the human researchers. "Shared knowledge with appropriate safeguards." "Cooperation between previously isolated shifter clans," Elijah contributed, his former skepticism replaced by pragmatic acceptance. As the discussion continued, a subtle warmth radiated from the crystal column, Iolana's consciousness expressing approval from her new state of being. Though no longer physically present in conventional terms, her influence remained as a guiding perspective that transcended individual concerns. The ceremonial dagger embedded in the crystal pulsed in rhythm with that distributed awareness, a physical anchor for a consciousness that now existed primarily beyond physical constraints. Its moonstone glowed with steady light, neither human nor shifter in essence, but the perfect integration of multiple realities. Dr. Whitmore approached Tasunka, scientific curiosity tempered by newfound respect for forces beyond conventional understanding. Your world has existed alongside ours for millennia, yet remained hidden. The implications for human knowledge are staggering. Knowledge without wisdom can be dangerous, Tasunka cautioned. Which is why whatever path forward we create must balance revelation with responsibility, understanding with respect for natural boundaries. Much like the interdimensional barriers themselves, she observed thoughtfully. Permeable but structured, allowing connection without corruption. In that simple observation lay the essence of what Iolana had sacrificed herself to protect. Not rigid separation between worlds, but healthy boundaries that permitted relationship while preventing exploitation. Balance rather than dominance, integration rather than assimilation. As the gathering prepared to depart the northern sanctuary, each person carried something transformed, perspectives altered, possibilities expanded, connections established that might grow into genuine partnership over time. The immediate crisis had passed, but the work of rebuilding balanced relationships between shifters, humans, and the wider cosmic order had only just begun. Tasunka lingered briefly after the others had started their ascent, his hand resting once more on the crystal column where Iolana's consciousness now resided. "I'll carry forward what we started," he promised quietly. "The bridge between worlds, between peoples, integration rather than division." A gentle pulse of warmth answered him, acknowledgement, encouragement, and something more personal that needed no words. Their connection transcended physical separation, existing now in a realm where conventional definitions of relationship no longer applied. As he turned to join the others, Tasunka felt a subtle shift in his perception, a heightened awareness of connections between all living things that hadn't existed before. A gift from Iolana, perhaps, or a natural evolution of his own consciousness through proximity to interdimensional transformation. Outside, the winter solstice night was giving way to the first hints of dawn, the longest darkness yielding to renewed light. An ancient cycle continuing, yet changed in subtle ways that would ripple outward through connected worlds for generations to come. The contract that had initially bound Iolana and Tasunka, a political arrangement built on deception and control, had been transformed through truth into something far more meaningful. A covenant of balanced partnership that extended beyond two individuals to encompass the relationship between entire realms of existence. In the growing light, shifters and humans emerged together from the ancient cave system, their shadows stretching behind them, not divided, but interwoven in patterns that suggested new possibilities for coexistence. And in the spaces between, shadows, for those with eyes to perceive it, a luminous presence moved, guardian, guide, and bridge between worlds. The journey that had begun with a binding contract forged in deception had culminated in a truth more powerful than any formal agreement. That balance comes not from dominance or separation, but from the conscious integration of diverse natures, working in harmony toward shared preservation of the worlds they collectively inhabited. And in that truth lay hope for futures yet unwritten, possibilities extending beyond the boundaries of what any single consciousness could imagine alone.